Okay, so the first period, when Singapore was ruled from India, TB was really the underside of the port city. The people who came in, especially those who had no family and those who were, had no money with them, were the ones most likely to have TB. And oftentimes, many of the TB patients were just dumped onto the shores of Singapore from, Indonesia, especially. The Dutch would just dump them onto the shores. So, if they're dumped like that, what happens is they had no one to care for them. They had no family. They couldn't join an association. So they became beggars, and homeless, living in the public spaces. So the only policy at the time was to remove them. The British would remove them because they would be a nuisance. And this policy led to the creation of Tan Tock Seng Hospital, which was not a government hospital at the time, but a community hospital, a private hospital, as we know from the name, right? Largely funded by Tan Tock Seng, who made a donation, and also other Asian, including non-Chinese businessmen and community leaders. So there was always a running battle with the colonial government in terms of funding for this hospital. The Asians wanted the British to fund it more. The British said, you fund it yourself, and oftentimes there was not enough money to run the hospital properly. And that showed really the limits of colonial governance. Most of the patients at Tan Tock Seng TTSH were Chinese working class, whereas the Europeans were mostly treated at GH, General Hospital, and now the current SGH. So this is a place that you can kind of bring your students to if you want. The Tan Tock Seng Museum Gallery is not very well managed, I would say, so maybe not very interesting to go there, but it does have some interesting artifacts and replicas like this one. There was a lack of information corresponding to the lack of a policy against tuberculosis in the earlier years. As we know with COVID-19 today, we know the most about the disease in the hospital, but we often do not know what's happening in the community. So the British have very little idea about what is the prevalence of TB in the general population. They only knew who came into the hospital, and most of them would die in the hospital because they came in very reluctantly in the late stage of the disease. And even the numbers, right? For example, here you can see some numbers. Tuberculosis, 25% of deaths registered in the Straits Settlements 1931. So this includes Malacca and Penang. And it's the largest, after, more than malaria and pneumonia, which is 16.5. So these two, right, were often mistaken for each other because they all had like coughing, and there was often no proper diagnosis or certification of death when someone died. So maybe they just took the word of the family or the neighbor, or just had a visual glance without studying the cause of death. So even these numbers are sort of very unreliable. Okay,